Welcome everyone to our breakout session, Food Operations, Sustainability, and the Non-Commercial Sector, a roundtable. As a reminder, you can engage in the Q&A by typing your questions into the chat bar. And it's my pleasure to bring up our moderator, Jackie Chi.
Thank you very much, Patty, and thank you to all of you out there joining us for this breakout session. I am very excited to be moderating this conversation today with our four incredible panelists. Kathy Cacciola, who is Vice President of Enterprise Sustainability for Aramark and also a member of our Menus of Change Business Leadership Council. We've also got Jessica Sinkowski, Vice President of Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility for Sodexo. Kyle Tafori, Director of Sustainability for Hackensack Meridian Health, which was an honoree of our CIA Food Service Director Plant Forward Healthcare Operations to Watch list, as well as Amy Center, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Kellogg Company. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So great to have you all here. So by way of introducing yourselves, I gave a very brief introduction for each of you. But I'd love to kick things off by asking each of you to describe in just a few minutes how your company defines sustainability and how that gets expressed through specific targets and objectives. Kathy, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks. Great to be here today and nice to see you all. So at Aramark, we define sustainability as both people, planet, and profit. So our sustainability plan, Be Well, Do Well, is something that we launched in 2019, which is in a sort of evolved version of where we were previously. So we've sort of sunset the language of corporate responsibility and corporate social responsibility, which I think can sometimes be seen as sort of nice to do or good to have rather than fundamental to the business and how we operate. So we really intentionally have been working towards evolving that language to sustainability. So our Be Well, Do Well plan starts with people at the center. We have a focus on enabling equity and well-being for millions of people. And then under planet, we have a focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then naturally, the intent is also to ensure the long-term health of our organization and our clients' organizations. Within those two sort of mega hero goals, if you will, we also have time-bound targets that support those broader goals. So for example, we've been doing a lot of work for many years around health and wellness, increasing fruits, veggies, whole grains, decreasing calorie, sodium, and saturated fat by 20% over 5 years. We have a goal around food waste reduction, like many companies do, reducing food waste 50% by 2030. And then even on single-use plastics, we have a big commitment around reducing single-use plastics broadly. And then we started with smaller targets with sort of the tip of the proverbial plastic iceberg of straws and stirrers by 60%. And then we're moving through the different product categories. So we have bigger picture, two big goals, and then lots of targets underneath to really drive performance and practices.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. We're definitely going to dive into that deeper, both how you set that larger strategy and how that gets translated into the specifics. But Kyle, how about you? How does your company define sustainability and how does that get expressed?
Sure. So as healthcare has evolved towards more prevention, we look at sustainability as, in terms of our communities, our hospitals are only going to be as healthy as the communities and the environment that we operate in. So we ingrain sustainability into every aspect of our operations, whether it's looking at, as part of our real estate portfolio, looking at energy reduction, water reduction, and having metrics for that. Food across our hospitality division, looking at the number of plant-based options that we're serving, our outreach in terms of educating folks around these topics, and really the whole gamut of sustainability. We make sure that it's aligned with our population health strategy, our social determinants of health strategy, and really the whole direction that our organization's going in.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kyle. Jessica, how about over at Sodexo?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Sodexo, we've included ESG in our mission statement. So it's been evolving in our ways of working since 1966. And right now we are focused on our Better Tomorrow 2025 roadmap. And so we're looking at focusing on sustainability from three different aspects: on the individual, which allows us to focus on our end consumers, as well as our own employees, looking at communities and society, and then the environment. And we have some specific KPIs across each of those areas. We actually have 9 global commitments and objectives that we're headed toward. And some of the more relevant ones for this conversation are around reducing food waste, which is a key priority for us, responsible sourcing strategy with a number of related metrics from that perspective, and our focus on plant-based eating as well.
Awesome, thank you. And you talked about responsible sourcing, and we've got somebody from the supply chain and the sourcing side here joining us also. Amy, Kellogg's has a very deep history and a long history around sustainability and wellness. Tell us a little bit about how that comes into today's strategy and how you look at sustainability issues.
Sure, yeah. You're right. It's a favorable position that we have, that our founder was interested in what we now call ESG back in his day, right? So, of course, started as original kind of being visionary around maybe we shouldn't eat our leftover pot roast for breakfast, and started to create the category of cereal and plant-based in the morning as an asset. But then, of course, also, started one of this is today still one of the largest foundations, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in the world. And then, a great conservationist as well. I sit just a couple miles down the road from the bird sanctuary he started. And, we have a award down in our lobby about the greatest ear of corn, a beautiful crystal ear of corn that he gave to farmers he worked with. So, we have all these different things coming together. So it's always kind of been there. And, we've had sustainability, or now ESG, really at the heart of what we've done for a long time. We've had a board committee on social responsibility and public policy since the 70s. So as everyone started to get some of those in the last few years, we've had it for a while. And so that's allowed us to maintain that focus. And then, like everyone else here, we have an interesting point where we're both, B2C, as in we're a branded company. Everyone hopefully has us in their pantry, but also, work really closely with clients like yourselves who are looking to reduce their footprint and maximize their impact. And so we have our ESG strategy really within our corporate strategy, which we call Deploy for Growth. So just alongside of,
Oh, I think, did Amy freeze for anybody else? Okay, looks like we might have lost Amy just in the middle of a great nugget, but we'll try to bring her back. Actually, let me just take this pause also to remind everyone that I've got plenty of questions for our panelists. I'm hoping we're going to have a really robust discussion amongst ourselves, but I hope that you will join in also by putting your questions in the chat, and we'll be reviewing those from time to time as well. So please feel free to put in your comments and your questions, and maybe share your experiences as well. So some of you sort of touched on this already, talking about, what your sustainability motto is and how you kind of come up with your plans. And welcome back, Amy. I was hoping that you could give us a little bit more insight into how you determine sustainability priorities for your company and what to focus on, because obviously there are so many different issues. Kyle, you mentioned energy and water usage and food waste and all of these different elements. But obviously what makes sense for one company to focus on is different for another company or brand. So I'd love for you to each kind of dive into what it is that you, how you determine what to focus on. And if anybody, I'll open that up if anybody wants to jump in.
I can jump in and we'll see if my internet holds. So we look at, I think one tactic that a lot of sustainability folks use is materiality, and how it aligns. Maybe this is where I might have gotten dropped, how it aligns with our business strategy as well. So within the same business strategy, Deploy for Growth, we look at what are those most material topics we're trying to address. And for us, it's like, well, first it starts with what are we at our heart? We're a food company. So how do we design our foods? How do we nourish with our foods? How do we make sure people are fed through accessible foods that we sell, as well as through philanthropic efforts around food donation? And then how do we make sure that those foods are sustainable? So how they're grown, how they're made, how they're packaged, all the way through, how do we make sure there's not food waste and things like that? And then how do we engage people with our brand? So that's kind of the way that we think about it and chunk it out, and then look that maturity lens at a kind of corporate level, but also within a specific topic. So we have really strong commitments to responsible sourcing. Well, we use a lot of ingredients, partner with thousands of suppliers. How do we start to talk about responsible sourcing? Well, materiality comes back into play around like, what are the issues within that are the most salient? What ingredients are the most salient, both from a risk profile as well as a business operations perspective?
That's awesome. Thank you, Amy. Jessica, I wonder actually if we could go to you also. In our prep call, you sort of talked about that everything is just a moment in time, and there are certain issues that are prioritized in a moment because it is important to that moment, and there are sometimes that the issue is not as important in that moment, but that doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that it has to take a step back. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process and how you kind of have to choose?
Yeah, I mean, the fascinating part about materiality assessments are that you're kind of racking, stacking all of the potential issues that are out there, and knowing that you can only focus your resources on so many to actually be effective. And so it's a really great process to be able to filter through that. And there can be moments in time where there are hot topics that you have to address because these are important, not just to your business, but to your stakeholders. And that's another key piece of all these materiality assessments, are that you're bringing in that outside voice. And that might be a voice that you're not normally bringing in with general business strategy, but for sustainability strategy, it is half of the work that we do. It is that important. And so that allows you to hear more of the topics that might be relevant at the moment or in the future that you need to start to think about working on before they become a big risk for the company. And so it's a great process to go through to be able to hear those voices, give weight to those voices as you see appropriate, and to know where to focus, and also to then be able to decide what you're not going to focus on, and you have rationale behind that. And that's very key as well, because you do need to use your resources where they can be most effective.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Kathy, are you on mute? I think maybe.
How about
yes.
now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
So just building off on that, it's a really great point, Jessica, in terms of the rationale for, what we are focusing on and what we're not. And, for us, when we think about the variety of stakeholders on the landscape, and I think it might be similar for most companies as well, those stakeholders include our employees, what's important to our employees, our clients, our consumers, so the individual who's going on a daily basis to any of our locations, our investors, and even NGOs that we engage with in the public landscape. And when you think about a company of our size and scale, operating 19 countries, 3 service sectors of uniforms, facilities, and food, and then multiple lines of business from higher ed to healthcare to business dining and more, there's a lot of different stakeholders in that scheme of those sort of main groups. So to Jessica's point, at the end of the day, we're not going to satisfy every stakeholder to every degree that they expect, but going through that process and really developing the rationale for why we've prioritized what we have is a really important outcome.
That's great. And Kyle, I know that in our conversations also, you had sort of brought up some of the expectations from employees within your system, kind of in terms of addressing the sustainability issues, and how that sort of guides what you do, or sort of gives you extra impetus to take on new initiatives as well.
Yeah, so, I think, and this was a big eye opener for me when I was presenting at New Hire Orientation. I was talking about primarily around the sustainable food initiatives that we were doing with antibiotic free and healthy beverages and more plant-based. And, I was talking, and then a couple folks came up after I was done and said, this is great, but this is what we expect from you. And, So here I was kind of bragging, saying how great we were, which we are, but, it was definitely a generational change, in terms of what our new hires and what our team members are expecting of us. And, to Jessica's point and to pretty much everybody here, it's been about flexibility. And, we have our overarching strategic mission of health and creating that healthiest environment and healthiest community possible. But, different things come up and we're able to adapt quickly. So like when we went with antibiotic-free meat, it was at a time that our antibiotic stewardship committees, antibiotic resistance and all of that was a hot topic internally. And it was, committees were really driving it. And we immediately aligned, knocking antibiotics out of meat. And our CEO, we got full approval, adopted a medical executive, letter, and we did that. And then from a energy standpoint, when the utilities in our state came out with their programs, we jumped onto that to take advantage of the funding. So it's just been about, flexibility, looking at all of our different stakeholders. And, if folks have an idea, they're empowered to help drive the change.
Yeah, and I wonder if we can stay on you for just another moment, Kyle, and open this up to the rest of the panelists. But obviously, things come up like a worldwide pandemic, and where everybody's business models, everybody's everyday lives have completely changed. Tell us a little that has impacted your operations in the past year, as well as your, what you were working on in terms of sustainability and how that impacted your progress there.
Sure. So, being at the epicenter of COVID, everyone within the organization had to change gears. So I went from having the sustainability hat to running logistics at our flagship hospital, and making sure that we were able to convert our cafeteria into a 76-bed patient unit for COVID patients. And as a health system, we had over 23,000 COVID admissions. So patients that stayed with us with COVID. And we changed entirely. All of our supply chain initiatives were put on hold. We had every initiative that we had across the network was put on hold, because it was an all hands on deck, everybody supporting everybody just to keep our team members safe, to keep the patients coming in safe and do the best that we can. So, one of the constants though for us was food. Now, obviously we had some changes with food. We didn't have cafeterias, the dining areas were not exactly open. Food was brought to the units. We had to keep everybody contained. We didn't want the COVID the team members going off the units back and forth. So, we changed everything, and we're still really facing those challenges. Kickstart things up again, but it's altered our plans, and I think our ability to be flexible, that was the definition of it, and being able to change at the drop of a hat. But we're still navigating forward what we're going to do. Obviously, there's a big emphasis on cost, but at the same time, there's also an even bigger emphasis on wellness, team member well-being. So food is at the core of that for us. So, probably the one area that we didn't get knocked off too far has been our food program. And that's something that we've kept to it. Obviously, we didn't do any education during COVID, but now we can't really say post-COVID entirely yet, but, we're back moving stuff forward and, letting folks breathe though at the same time, because it was obviously a very emotional and tough experience to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, Kathy, I wonder if you have perspectives on that from sort of where you sit in terms of supporting your clients and providing services for your clients.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly were impacted by COVID in terms of the business that we're in. Most of our workers are frontline workers, so the folks who are serving the food, cleaning the facilities that were critical, during the pandemic, which is still ongoing. And so it was both a super hyper focus on safety for our own employees in the midst of this major disruption of how do we shift, what do we do, how can we still provide the necessary services that are critical while keeping our own employees safe. So it was, as Kyle said, all hands on deck to try to make sure that focus was there as we adjusted. And, we really saw some heroes come through, a lot of bravery in different situations across the business. And so it was great to see. And I think, in terms of if I could reflect on the positives of going through such a disruption like a pandemic, it really did highlight the necessity and the refocus on people and how much that is the core of every business and how important that is, and that these frontline workers were really, being able to be elevated as heroes again. I think that was one silver lining that's emerging from the pandemic.
And one thing I just want to add, a point that to end with the positive note on the COVID aspect, I think it really demonstrated how we can come together to address something, on the snap of a finger. We converted that cafeteria into a 76-bed patient unit in a week. And seeing everybody come together around a bigger cause, it was inspiring to see. We were working with folks that we didn't know each other. A lot of us were working in areas that we weren't experts in, but we came together and we were able to accomplish a lot. And I think that lends towards the sustainability mission and what we're trying to accomplish and the challenges we face.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I would agree that the people side really is where we dug into, and most organizations did, and that focus on safety and well-being of our frontline employees and our consumers and our community members. I think on the environmental side, it was sort of interesting to see the evolution of issues with, the rapid closure of locations. We had a massive amount of food that needed to be donated very quickly as operations were shutting down like that. So we had a significant amount of activity there, and then naturally a significant drop off in business. So we weren't producing as much surplus food as we weren't even producing that much food in general. And then the elephant in the room, I think, for everybody is around the disposables piece, and initially the need for disposables from a safety perspective because of the unknown factors, but now more recently the increase of disposables given just the need for convenience and portability and not serving people on site. So we're beginning to transition away from that. I think a lot of companies are starting to look at, certainly we allow back of house washed reusables and durables and things like that. But we, like every company, are going through the process of determining when is it safe to reintroduce bring your own reusable ware. And I think that'll be a key piece in really sort of shifting the needle on the disposable piece again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I feel like linked to that disposables piece is sort of the packaging aspect, and whether it's single-use packaging for transporting food, or just sort of general packaging and how things are coming through the supply chain and sourcing. Amy, I wonder also, again, sort of from the manufacturer and the supplier side, what were the kinds of messages you were hearing from people in terms of the products that they might need to sort of meet their needs and continue to meet their sustainability goals, even as we are going through big challenges? Obviously, we heard a lot about supply chain challenges in general in the food supply and sort of across all sorts of goods.
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of dichotomy throughout our business, right? So we of course service folks like yourselves. We also, of course, have a very large retail business. So as things, you were all reprioritizing as places were shutting down, that meant we were reprioritizing. We also had a huge boom in our retail side where everyone was at home and saying, what do I feed my kids? And everyone's like, oh, right. I've got cereal. I'm going to get some snacks. Let's get through all of this. And, so it's been a really interesting piece. And I would just, of course, echo for all of us as employees, we just had a huge focus on kind of that the people safety piece and the responsibility that we felt. It was very tangible within the organization of like, our job is to get food to people wherever they are, wherever they may be, however they might do it. Like today it's going to be here, tomorrow might be somewhere else. We're going to figure it out. That's our job. And really kind of that calling of like, we're about making sure that people get fed. That's our company's job. And so how can we rise to the occasion here and do that with, utmost safety in mind for our people and for the communities that we're servicing. So, it's been a really interesting thing. But the other thing that has happened is that, and Kyle alluded to it, is that there is not a either this or that feeling among consumers and customers as well. It's not, I'm going to sacrifice this for this other thing. People understand this interconnected people health, planetary health, kind of community health piece that they don't want to give up. And I feel the same way, right? Like you don't want to give up your personal safety, but you also don't want to be like, oh yeah, I'm cool wasting all this stuff. So trying to find the right balance with that, respond to the needs, it really has accelerated a lot of our sustainability journey. It's just then how do you do it? So one example is in our like away from home channel, we'll look at things like bulk distribution models, right? Where you might be at a hotel and you go over and they've got the little crank thing to get your cereal out, and you get to mix and match your favorite cereals, and it serves so many purposes. We love it. But then we said, oh, okay, COVID, like, do people want to do that anymore? You want to touch stuff, again, early days. So, there was innovation around, can we do touchless, distribution? So we're not sacrificing as much. Is that okay with people? Thinking about the future, what new versions of that? How do we have, and we've done some cool innovations with machines that help us create those like single serve opportunities without, where you can still use your, reusable containers. So, or your personal bowl, depending on what it is. So I think it's really sparked some innovation as well as we try and do two things at once, and make sure that we're responding to kind of the holistic needs of our consumers, our customers, of our communities and our planet. So it's been a really interesting time to be in this kind of field.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dive in a little bit deeper and a little bit more specific in terms of, we've got obviously the larger sustainability strategy using materiality assessments to kind of figure out what that is, but also we're talking about the non-commercial food service sector here. And obviously there are kind of some commercial elements that come into that, and retail and sort of consumer elements that come into that. But we've got Aramark and Sodexo here, two of the largest contract food service companies. We've got Kyle, who's representing sort of a site specific, not a single unit because you've got various units, but sort of a client of Aramark and Sodexo. I'd love to dive into, Kyle, you've got stakeholders telling you what their sustainability desires are and needs are. Jessica, you have a sustainability and a corporate responsibility plan that is defined for Sodexo, and same for Aramark. But you also have all of these different sites who are saying, no, hold up, we want to meet this certification, or we'd like to meet these standards, or our community is telling us that this aspect is really important to us. How do you manage all of that, and how does that impact bids that you might be, either Kyle on your side, sort of the RFPs that you're putting out there, and Kathy and Jessica, sort of how you answer those RFPs and kind of build programs for your clients?
I'll go ahead and jump in first. So, we like to come to our clients with a plan and approach and a set of priorities. So that's sort of the starting point, or what are the programs and practices that we are leading from the center? So that sort of go out across the organization. And those programs and practices naturally correlate with the priorities that we've all just been talking about. And so there's sort of a baseline expectations for all of our locations that will be executing against our no deforestation policy and implementing our food waste reduction practices. And if we have viable surplus food, donating it through our food donation program. But there are some client locations that want to turn the dial up further or faster. So I think single-use plastics is a good example. We have a runway that we're taking the entire organization across to continually reduce. But one client location might come to us and say, hey, we want to rid ourselves of plastics entirely within the next month. So then there's a rapid analysis process of what can we do there? What are the alternatives? What are the costs? And that's where the conversation happens, really, really close to the front line. And that's what Kyle is probably very most familiar with on the flip side of it there.
So, yeah, I think, from our perspective, obviously 17 hospitals, and it's amazing how different each part of New Jersey is from one another. But, we're unique in that we have some in terms of the food arena, we have two self-op hospitals, several that utilize Morrison's, several that utilize Sodexo. And, we set the goals up front as part of the contracting process with all vendors. And everybody knows we're a leader in sustainable food, and we're going to push the envelope, and it's just a requirement. There's no questions asked. I mean, this is what we want to do, and we do it. But, in terms of our sites, obviously different hospitals have different, physicians that are very engaged in this, different team members. So we provide the flexibility to have different types of cooking demonstrations, different types of events to push different initiatives across. But given that, and we don't even, to be honest, need it in our contracts anymore. I mean, it's set up front from our executive team that oversees the RFP process that I'm a part of. We expect 70% minimum antibiotic-free meat. Our self-op hospitals at 98%. Local spend percentage, sustainable food spend percentage, food waste reduction targets. We got to meet these, and it's. We've developed good partnerships with all the companies that we've worked with, but, it's really driven from that corporate. Those metrics are driven from corporate, but we do provide each site to creatively, meet the education and the different outreach aspects of it.
Kyle, I wonder, as you're putting these into your RFPs, do you ever get a company or a response that's just like, no, that's not possible? We can't even compete or jump into that.
So if we did get that response, then it would make the decision a little bit easier. We just wouldn't. It's not an option.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we've had companies, when we first started, especially mainly around the antibiotic-free meat. We had a company say, no, we can't do this. It's going to cost this much more. And then we notified them that within 30 days, we'd be terminating our contract with them. And, several $1 million of spend would go out. And that was just for one of the hospitals. If it was everybody, you're looking 30 million plus. And then, a week later, we were taste testing antibiotic-free meat from around the world. So, we set the expectations clear. And but the companies do a good job. They, once they know that we mean it, and then they figure out a way to work with us to get it done.
I think what we're seeing is that the landscape is that we need to be weaving through the sustainability across what we offer and what we're doing. So it's not just about a single solution. So as an example, beyond just the types of cleaning products that are being used, it's also the process that's being used that can be a more sustainable process. And so that's a part of the offer, but that also requires the proper training behind it so that the people actually doing it are doing it properly. And the same goes in the kitchen. So it's not just about having that plant-based option available. First, it has to be selected to go onto the menu, but also the culinarians may need training to understand how to cook that and how that might be different than the products they were using before, and how that the best way to prepare that meal. So having that full sort of bow around what's possible is great. And the need for that, some of that behavior change training is really key to get people to really embrace the value behind what's changing and why it's good, so that then they're much more eager to move forward with any of those types of changes. And we know that the requests that come from the clients and the end consumers might be different. And so we're always trying to balance that where we can, to make sure that we are, bringing forward the most sustainable options possible. And, our targets are vulnerable to these changing needs. And which is why we're all in this together. I think everybody recognizes that, and that's why it's picking the right clients and picking the right vendors is key, because we all rely on each other. We all end up back in the same supply chain at the end of the day. So that partnership is absolutely key.
Jackie, if I could just add one thing too, I think the work that Kyle's done with his team in aligning the business and the sustainability practices is absolutely critical, especially for food service partners like ourselves in Sodexo, because if a sustainability team is not aligned with the local management team and they're coming direct to us, it's a little bit more challenging to actually drive the practices. So ensuring that the local teams of sustainability and business are aligned and coming to the food service companies together to say this is important, that makes the activation much easier.
That's awesome. Thank you. Amy, I think this also sort of comes to you as well in terms of, again, the supply chain and sort of the demands that many of these sustainability goals need to be coming through the supply chain, having those ingredients and those supplies that can meet these goals. What are the kinds of trends that you are seeing in terms of products that people are looking for, and whether reformulation or responsible sourcing, and so that they're able to kind of be transparent across their supply chain?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I would say that a couple of things that we're seeing. One thing I'll just plus one to Jessica's comment too about what the consumer wants versus what clients want, and making sure that everybody along that chain is kind of holding hands, I think is really important, because there are trade-offs in this space. There can be, right? And so I think making sure that we come bearing our unique skill set of subject matter expertise, which not every end client has. We don't all have Kyles everywhere, right? So I think, making sure that when we're talking about it, you're focused on the most material things, the most salient topics that, or they're maybe not salient, but they're easy, great. It's where it's not salient and it's really hard that we have problems, right? So I think that those are things that we can, there's an important partnership and education and good conversation that comes with it. And that's part of the reason, some of these trends that we're seeing, like plant-based protein, is so great to see, because it's a salient issue. No matter which way you're slicing it, you're looking at it from a health perspective, you're looking at it from a climate or water or waste perspective, looking at eating more plants is a win, right? And so for us, of course, we have Morningstar Farms and Incognito in our portfolio, but we also have cereal, of which most of which is plant-based. People forget grains are plants. And so, we've got all of these different assets at our disposal that says, we hear that you want to be promoting, plant-based foods and having people eat more plants during the day without being super prescriptive that you must be, vegan or you must be vegetarian. Here are some options that are win-wins for your consumers, right? So helping them understand that, buy a bowl of cereal or this snack versus, maybe a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich is a way that you might win on multiple fronts, right? And you don't feel like you're giving up that much. So I think that's one trend that's really great to see. Sustainable packaging and or free from packaging type trends, I think, are continuing. That's one that I think is really, really easy for every consumer to understand. So it's always very top of mind, especially on single-use things like, utensils or straws and stuff like that. We don't have that as part of our portfolio anymore. We've eliminated all of those types of things. We used to, have spoons in our packaging, and we said, bring your own. So I think that those things are really valuable conversations, and they're a very tangible way of making impact. And then I think the longer term, and I think Kathy mentioned it at the beginning, of just kind of making sure you have a resilient system, and that it's not just about what consumers are asking for today or clients are asking for today, but thinking about the future. And I think that's where climate change more broadly and water security more broadly really come in. And I would say that's more of a B2B conversation at the moment than a consumer facing one, but that tide is turning a bit. I think people understand it a lot more, and I think it's our job as a brand, and it's our client's job as the face in these different canteens and things around the world to be able to provide that information in a way that's easy to consume. And so I think that's the next frontier in this space. And right alongside of that, connected to that climate piece, is the food waste one. So again, we have a lot of assets in that because we don't have food that is easily wasted, but there's always more to be done in that space.
Jackie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to let you know we need to transition.
Yes, thank you so much, Patty. And thank you, Kathy, Jessica, Kyle, Amy. I feel like we could have had a separate breakout session with each of you to go into this. So we had this powerhouse panel, but of course it means that unfortunately we don't have enough time to get to everybody. But I do want to keep you on for just a moment, because we'd love to hear the top takeaway from each of you, just in one sentence, to kind of encapsulate everything. Right after I give some housekeeping announcements, we are going into a networking time with all sorts of fun activities happening in the Innovation Hub as well. We've got special culinary demonstration and panel discussion happening in sessions. We've also got Larissa Zimberoff doing a Meet the Author conversation that'll also happen in sessions. We've still got our networking going strong with today's topic: what steps are you or your company taking to reduce your carbon footprint? And we hope you'll enjoy today's network reception activities, and then we'll see you all back on the main stage tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. So with that, one last takeaway from each of you. I feel like I've got about 10, so I'm going to be intrigued to see what each of you choose as your one takeaway. Maybe we'll go in reverse order this time. Amy, what's your one takeaway?
I think my takeaway is understand your issues and your areas you can impact, and then have those honest conversations with your partners along the supply chain to see how you can work on them together.
I love that. Thank you. Kyle?
So I just changed it in my head. I think the biggest thing is being flexible to the circumstances and being able to move quickly to capitalize on opportunities and whatever strategic initiatives pop up, being able to link up with that to drive change quicker.
Perfect. Thank you. Jessica?
My takeaway is something that Amy hinted at in terms of innovating. Now is not the time to be doing the same things that we were doing 12 months ago. If you're doing the same things, then you're not innovating. We need to use these disruptions, the pandemic, the social injustice, climate change, as accelerators to innovate better and to come up with new solutions to where we want to be as a society.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Jessica and Kathy.
And I'll just add that I think the collaboration piece is one effective tool to advance everything that we've just talked about. So collaboration across all of your stakeholders, with your internal teams, with your external parties, hear the different voices, engage, and then figure out a pathway forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And speaking of collaboration, let's now go to networking and reception, and hopefully you can find some new collaborators to advance these initiatives. So thank you so much, everyone.